When I heard my son Daniel's voice drifting through the kitchen doorway at Thanksgiving dinner, I thought at first that I had misheard him. I was standing in my daughter-in-law Rebecca's kitchen, arranging the deviled eggs I had spent 3 hours preparing that morning, the same deviled eggs my late husband Robert used to say were the best he had ever tasted in his 62 years of life. The kitchen smelled of rosemary and roasting turkey, and for a moment, just a brief and beautiful moment, I felt like everything was finally coming together after the hardest year of my life. Robert had been gone for 14 months. 14 months of sleeping alone in the bed we had shared for 41 years. 14 months of setting one plate at the table instead of two. 14 months of learning how to exist in a world that suddenly felt too large and too empty and too quiet. But today was Thanksgiving, and my son had invited me to spend it with his wife's family, and I had allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, I was still wanted somewhere. I had driven 2 hours to get here. I had brought 4 different dishes because I wanted to contribute, wanted to feel useful, wanted to show Rebecca's family that I was not just some grieving widow looking for pity. I had worn my nicest burgundy sweater, the one Robert bought me for our 40th anniversary, and I had spent an extra 20 minutes on my hair because I wanted to look presentable. I wanted Daniel to be proud of me. But then I heard his voice, and everything changed. "She's becoming a financial drain, honestly," Daniel said, and even from the kitchen, I could hear the casual cruelty in his tone, the way he spoke about me as if I were a leaky faucet or an old car that cost too much to maintain. "Every month it's something new. The roof needs fixing. The furnace is making a strange noise. She needs help with her property taxes. I mean, how much longer can this go on?" I set down the tray of deviled eggs very slowly, very carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter me into 1,000 pieces. My hands were trembling. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Well, she's 72, a woman's voice said, and I recognized it as Rebecca's mother, Constance. "At that age, things start to fall apart. It's just the natural order of things." "Exactly," Daniel said, and I could picture him nodding, could picture him sitting in that expensive leather armchair I had helped him buy 3 years ago when he and Rebecca moved into this house, the house I had given them $45,000 for as a down payment, the house I had refinanced my own mortgage to help them afford. And the thing is, she's not going to be around much longer anyway. I mean, let's be realistic here. She's got high blood pressure, she's got arthritis, she's still not over losing Dad. How many more years can she possibly have left? How many more years? I pressed my hand against the cold granite countertop to steady myself. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too hot, the walls pressing in on me from all sides. I had given birth to this man. I had nursed him through fevers and nightmares and heartbreaks. I had worked double shifts at the hospital for 18 years to pay for his education, his braces, his college tuition, his first car. I had loved him more than I had ever loved anything in my entire life, and he was sitting in the next room calculating how soon I would die. "The real problem," Daniel continued, and I heard the clink of ice in a glass, probably the expensive bourbon I had bought him for his birthday last month, "is that she's too proud to sell the house. That place is worth at least $380,000 in this market, maybe more. If she would just agree to sell and move into one of those senior living places, we could split the proceeds after her living expenses and actually have some breathing room." "Has she agreed to that?" Constance asked. "Not yet, but give it time. She's getting more confused, more forgetful. Last week she called me asking where she put her glasses, and they were on her head the whole time." He laughed, and the sound of it cut through me like a knife. "It won't be long before we can make a case for power of attorney. Once that happens, we control everything. The house, the savings, the investments Dad left her, all of it." I felt something shift inside me then, something fundamental and irreversible. For a moment, I could not breathe. I could not move. I could only stand there in that beautiful kitchen with its marble countertops and stainless steel appliances, appliances I had helped pay for, and listen to my only son plan how to take control of my life. "Robert," I thought, "Robert, are you hearing this? Is this what we raised?" But Robert was gone, and I was alone, and my son was sitting in the next room with his in-laws discussing me like I was an asset to be liquidated rather than a human being who had sacrificed everything for him. I do not know how long I stood there. It might have been 30 seconds. It might have been 5 minutes. Time had become strange and slippery, the way it does when the world you thought you knew suddenly reveals itself to be something entirely different. And then I heard Rebecca's voice, and everything became even more complicated.
Daniel, can you help me with the wine in the basement? There was something in her tone that made me pause, something careful and controlled, like a woman walking across a frozen lake, testing each step before she committed her full weight. I heard chairs scraping, footsteps moving, and then silence. I should have stayed in the kitchen. I should have finished arranging my deviled eggs and pretended I had not heard anything. That is what the old Margaret would have done. The Margaret who had spent her entire life smoothing over conflicts, making excuses for people who hurt her, convincing herself that if she just loved hard enough and gave enough and sacrificed enough, everyone would eventually love her back. But that Margaret had just listened to her son describe her as a financial drain who would not be around much longer anyway. So instead of staying in the kitchen, I moved quietly toward the dining room doorway. I needed to hear more. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. What I saw stopped me cold. Rebecca was standing by the sideboard, her back to me, and she was holding her phone at an angle that could only mean one thing. She was recording. The little red light was visible even from where I stood, and her phone was positioned to capture the entire dining room table where Daniel had been sitting, with her parents and her brother. She had been recording everything. For a moment, I did not understand. Why would Rebecca record her own husband talking about his mother? What possible reason could she have for documenting this conversation? And then Daniel came back up from the basement, carrying 2 bottles of wine, and I saw the way Rebecca looked at him, and suddenly I understood everything. She did not look at him like a wife looks at a husband she loves. She looked at him the way I had seen patients look at their tumors on X-rays, with a kind of grim recognition, a knowledge that something needed to be removed. Rebecca was planning to leave him, and she wanted evidence. I stepped back into the kitchen before either of them could see me, my mind racing. I had always liked Rebecca. She was quiet and thoughtful, not like the flashy girls Daniel had dated in college. She had a degree in accounting and worked for a nonprofit that helped families in poverty, and I had always thought she was too good for my son, though I had never allowed myself to say it out loud. Now I wondered what she had seen that I had refused to see. What had Daniel done to make his own wife secretly record him on Thanksgiving Day? What other cruelties had she witnessed that I had dismissed, or explained away, or pretended not to notice? Dinner that evening was an exercise in surrealism. I sat at the table between Rebecca's brother Christopher and her Aunt Marianne, eating turkey and mashed potatoes and green bean casserole, smiling and nodding and answering questions about Robert and my garden and my volunteer work at the church, all while my son sat across from me talking about real estate prices and investment strategies as if he had not just been planning to take control of my entire life. "The stuffing is delicious, Rebecca," I said at one point, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, something that looked almost like guilt. "Thank you, Margaret," she said softly. "I'm glad you could be here." Daniel glanced at me then, and his expression was so casual, so unconcerned, that I felt another wave of that strange, disorienting grief. He really did not think I had heard anything. He really believed I was just his confused, aging mother who would sit quietly and wait to die while he figured out how to profit from it. "Mom, you look tired," he said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "Are you feeling okay? You seem a little pale." "I'm fine, Daniel. Just missing your father. The holidays are hard." "Of course they are." His voice was warm and sympathetic, and I realized with a shock that this was how he had always been, Warm when it suited him, sympathetic when he needed something. My son was not a good man who said something terrible in a moment of weakness. My son was a man who wore goodness like a mask, taking it off the moment he thought no one was watching. How had I missed this for 43 years? How had I raised a child, loved a child, sacrificed everything for a child, and never seen who he really was? Because I did not want to see it, because seeing it would have broken me. After dinner, I helped clear the table while the men retreated to the living room to watch football. Rebecca was loading the dishwasher when I approached her, my heart pounding, my palms sweating. "Rebecca," I said quietly, "can I speak with you for a moment, privately?" She looked at me and I saw fear in her eyes, real fear, the kind that comes from being caught. "Of course, Margaret. Let's go upstairs." We went to the guest bedroom on the second floor, the room where I would be sleeping that night. Rebecca closed the door behind us and turned to face me, her expression careful and guarded.
"I heard what Daniel said," I told her, "in the dining room before dinner, about me being a financial drain, about not being around much longer." Rebecca's face crumpled. "Oh, Margaret, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were... I also saw you recording it." Silence. Complete and absolute silence. Rebecca stood there with her mouth slightly open, her hands gripping the edge of the dresser behind her, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how much I knew and what I might do with the information. "Please," she finally said, "please don't tell him. I know this looks bad, but I can explain." "Then explain." She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, the words came out in a rush like water breaking through a dam. "I'm leaving him, Margaret. I've been planning it for 8 months. I have a lawyer. I have a separate bank account he doesn't know about. I've been documenting everything because..." She paused, swallowing hard. "Because your son is not the man I thought I married. Tell me." And she did. For the next 2 hours, while the football game played downstairs and the men argued about quarterbacks and playoff predictions, Rebecca told me everything. She told me about the credit cards Daniel had opened in her name without her knowledge, running up $67,000 in debt. She told me about the affair he'd been having with a woman from his office for the past 3 years, an affair that had produced a child he was paying child support for out of their joint savings. She told me about the way he spoke to her when they were alone, the cutting remarks, the constant criticism, the way he made her feel stupid and worthless and lucky to have him. She told me about the day she found the folder on his computer labeled Mom's Estate, containing spreadsheets calculating my assets, my life expectancy, the likely timeline for my decline into incapacity. "He's been planning this for years," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "He has projections, Margaret, actual financial projections based on when you might need to go into a nursing home, when you might be declared incompetent, when you might die. He's been treating your life like a business investment." I sat on the edge of the guest bed, feeling older than I had ever felt in my entire 72 years. My hands were shaking. My chest hurt. I wanted to call Robert, to hear his voice, to have him tell me that this was all some terrible mistake. But Robert was gone, and this was real, and my son was downstairs laughing at a football play while his wife and his mother sat upstairs piecing together the full scope of his betrayal. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. "Why do you want me involved?" Rebecca wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Because he's going to try to destroy me in the divorce. He's already told his lawyer that I'm unstable, that I have mental health issues, that I can't be trusted. He's going to fight for everything, the house, the savings, even the retirement accounts that are legally mine. And I need witnesses, Margaret. I need people who can testify to what kind of man he really is." "You want me to testify against my own son?" "I want you to tell the truth. That's all. Just tell the truth about what you heard today, about what he's been planning to do to you. his lawyer can't spin that. His lawyer can't make that look like the rantings of a bitter ex-wife. If his own mother takes the stand and describes how he talked about waiting for her to die so he could take her money. She stopped, her voice breaking. I'm sorry. I know how much this must hurt you. I know you love him. I closed my eyes. I thought about Daniel as a baby, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine. I thought about Daniel at 5 years old, crying because the other children made fun of his glasses. I thought about Daniel at 18, so proud in his graduation robes, telling me I was the best mother in the world. Where had that boy gone? Had he ever really existed? Or had I invented him because I needed so desperately to believe that my sacrifices had created something good? I need time, I told Rebecca. I need to think about this. Of course, take all the time you need, but Margaret, she reached out and took my hand, and I saw something in her eyes that I recognized, something I had seen in my own mirror for the past 14 months. The look of a woman who has lost everything she thought she had and is trying to build something new from the wreckage. I squeezed her hand, unable to speak. That night, lying in the guest bed in my daughter-in-law's house, I did not sleep. I stared at the ceiling and I thought about my life, about all the choices I had made, about all the money I had given away thinking it was love when maybe it was just enabling a monster.
I thought about the $45,000 for the down payment on this house. I thought about the $12,000 I had given Daniel 3 years ago when he said he needed emergency surgery and his insurance would not cover it. Surgery that Rebecca now told me had never happened. I thought about the $8,000 for the business opportunity that turned out to be a gambling debt. I thought about the $3,500 for the car repairs that were actually hotel rooms for his mistress. I thought about the monthly $800 I had been sending for the past 2 years to help with their mortgage, money that Rebecca said Daniel had been pocketing while telling her the mortgage was paid. Over the past decade, I estimated that I had given my son at least $127,000, maybe more, probably more. All of it freely given, all of it with love, all of it based on lies. Robert and I had worked our entire lives for that money. Robert had driven the same truck for 23 years because we were saving for our retirement. I had worn the same winter coat for a decade because we were saving for Daniel's education. We had canceled vacations, skipped dinners out, bought generic grands and secondhand furniture and economy cars, all so that we could provide for our son and still have something left for our golden years. And now Robert was dead, and our son was calculating how soon I would follow him so he could get his hands on whatever was left. The next morning, I told Daniel I was not feeling well and needed to go home early. He barely looked up from his phone. "Okay, Mom, drive safe. Let me know when you get there." "Of course." I hugged Rebecca at the door, and she pressed a small piece of paper into my hand. On it was written a phone number and a name, Patricia Hartwell, attorney at law. "She specializes in elder abuse cases," Rebecca whispered. "She's expecting your call." I drove home in a daze, the bare November trees blurring past my windows, the gray sky pressing down on me like a weight. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was setting and my house looked strange and foreign, like a place I had never really known. But it was mine. This house was mine. Robert and I had built our life here, raised our son here, grown old here, and no one, not even my own flesh and blood, was going to take it from me. I called Patricia Hartwell the next day. She was a tall woman in her early 60s with silver hair cut short and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, filled with plants and books and photographs of her grandchildren. She looked like someone's grandmother, but when she spoke, her voice had the precision and power of a surgeon's scalpel. "Tell me everything," she said. "Start from the beginning." So I did.
I told her about Robert's death and the year of grief that followed. I told her about Daniel's visits that became less frequent, his phone calls that became shorter, his requests for money that became larger and more insistent. I told her about Thanksgiving dinner and what I heard my son say about me, about the calculations he had made, about the power of attorney he was hoping to obtain. I told her about Rebecca and the recordings and the affair and the debt and the folder on Daniel's computer labeled Mom's Estate. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, her expression giving nothing away. When I finally finished, my throat raw from talking and my eyes burning from holding back tears, she set down her pen and looked at me for a long moment. "Mrs. Chen," she said, "I've been practicing elder law for 37 years. I've seen every kind of financial abuse, every kind of manipulation, every kind of betrayal that one family member can inflict on another. And I want you to know something." She leaned forward, her eyes holding mine. "You are not alone. You are not stupid. You are not to blame for what your son has done. You are a victim of a calculated, sustained campaign of exploitation, and you have every right to protect yourself." I started to cry then. The kind of deep, shuddering sobs that come from a place beyond words. Patricia handed me a box of tissues and waited patiently until I could speak again. "What do I do now?" I asked. "First, we protect your assets. Tomorrow morning, we are going to your bank to change all your accounts. New account numbers, new passwords, new beneficiaries. We're removing Daniel's name from everything. We're also going to contact your financial advisor and ensure that new changes can be made to your investments without your explicit written consent and verification by a third party. Okay, second, we're going to have a locksmith change every lock on your house. You're going to install a security system with cameras. You're going to document every contact Daniel makes with you from this point forward. Okay. Third, we're going to prepare a new will and new power of attorney documents. You're going to choose someone you trust, someone who is not Daniel, to make decisions for you if you ever become incapacitated. Do you have anyone like that?" I thought about it. "My brother Thomas, he lives in Boston. We've always been close." "Good. We'll contact Thomas and explain the situation. With his consent, we'll name him as your primary agent for all legal and medical decisions." "And fourth?" Patricia's expression hardened. "Fourth, we wait. Rebecca is filing for divorce within the next 30 days. When she does, there will be discovery, depositions, subpoenas. Everything will come out. The affairs, the debts, the fraud. And when it does, you're going to be there to testify about what you heard at Thanksgiving dinner, about the money your son has stolen from you, about his plans to take control of your life and your assets." "You want me to testify against my own son?" "I want you to tell the truth under oath. What the court does with that truth is not up to you or me, but I promise you this, Margaret." She reached across the desk and took my hand. "When this is over, you will be free, you will be safe, and you will have your dignity back." The next few months were the hardest of my life. Harder than Robert's illness, harder than his death. Harder than learning to live alone for the first time in 41 years. I did everything Patricia told me to do. I changed my accounts, my locks, my will. I installed security cameras that sent alerts to my phone every time someone approached my door. I documented every text message, every voicemail, every email Daniel sent me. And there were many, because once Daniel realized that his monthly $800 checks had stopped arriving, the communications increased dramatically. "Mom, is everything okay? I noticed the transfer didn't come through this month. Just want to make sure there wasn't an error at the bank." "Mom, Rebecca mentioned you seemed upset at Thanksgiving. If I said something that bothered you, I'm sorry. Let's talk about it." "Mom, I'm starting to get worried. You're not returning my calls. Please let me know you're all right. Mom, this is ridiculous. I just drove 2 hours to check on you, and you wouldn't even open the door. What is going on with you? Are you having mental health issues? Do I need to call a doctor? I saved every message. I recorded every voicemail. I kept a detailed journal of every interaction, just as Patricia had instructed. In January, Rebecca filed for divorce. The news spread through our small community like wildfire, and suddenly everyone wanted to tell me how sorry they were, how shocked they were, how they had always thought Daniel and Rebecca were such a lovely couple. I said nothing. I smiled and nodded and thanked them for their concerns, and I waited. In February, the discovery process began. Daniel's lawyer demanded access to Rebecca's financial records, her communications, her medical history. Rebecca's lawyer demanded the same from Daniel. That was when things got interesting. The forensic accountant Rebecca had hired found everything. The secret credit cards, the offshore account Daniel had been using to hide money from both his wife and the IRS, the payments to his mistress, the $15,000 he had taken from his office's petty cash fund over the past 4 years, the forged checks on Rebecca's personal account, and the folder on his computer labeled Mom's Estate, containing not just financial projections, but also draft documents. Draft power of attorney papers naming himself as my sole agent. Draft conservatorship petitions citing my declining mental state and inability to manage my own affairs. Draft deeds transferring ownership of my house to him. He had been planning everything, every detail, every step. All he had been waiting for was the right moment to strike. In March, Daniel was arrested. The charges were multiple and serious: wire fraud, identity theft, elder abuse, embezzlement. His employer had pressed charges for the stolen petty cash fund. Rebecca had pressed charges for the forged checks and the credit cards. And I, after many long conversations with Patricia and many sleepless nights staring at my ceiling, had pressed charges for the financial exploitation that had stolen over $127,000 from me over the past decade. The day they took him away in handcuffs, I was standing at my kitchen window, watching the news van parked across the street. My hands were wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, and I was trying to feel something, anything about what was happening. My son was being led out of his house by police officers. I should have felt satisfied. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt the righteous anger of a mother who had finally seen through her child's manipulation and taken a stand. Instead, I felt empty, hollowed out, like something had been scooped out of my chest and replaced with cold air. The phone rang. It was Thomas, calling from Boston. "Maggie, I just saw the news. Are you okay?" "I don't know, Tommy. I really don't know. Do you want me to come down? I can be there by tonight." No, I need to do this alone. I need to feel this alone." "You don't have to do anything alone ever again, Maggie. You know that, right?" I closed my eyes. I know, but right now, I need to sit with this. I need to understand how I got here. I need to figure out who I am now that... I stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Now that you're not Daniel's mother anymore? I'll always be his mother. That's the worst part. No matter what he did, no matter what he was planning to do, I'll always be his mother. And some part of me will always love him. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "That's not weakness, Maggie. That's humanity. But loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. You taught me that, remember? When I was drinking and you refused to give me money, but you drove to every single one of my AA meetings for 2 years, you loved me enough to say no. That's what you're doing now. You're loving Daniel enough to let him face the consequences of what he's done." I started crying then, really crying, the kind of crying I had not allowed myself since Robert's funeral. I cried for the son I had lost, for the son I had never really had. I cried for the money I had given away thinking it was love. I cried for the years I had spent believing lies because the truth was too painful to face. And when I was done, when there were no more tears left, I washed my face, made a fresh cup of coffee, and called Patricia Hartwell. "I'm ready," I told her. "Whatever comes next, I'm ready." The trial began in June. It was everything Patricia had warned me it would be: brutal, exhausting, emotionally devastating. Daniel's lawyer tried every trick in the book. He painted Rebecca as a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge. He painted me as a confused, elderly woman being manipulated by my daughter-in-law. He painted Daniel as a loving son who had made some mistakes but never intended to hurt anyone. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings Rebecca had made, the documents found on Daniel's computer, the forensic accounting that traced every dollar he had stolen, the testimony of his mistress who had been promised she would be set for life once Daniel got control of my assets, the testimony of his former co-workers who described a pattern of lies and manipulation going back years, and my testimony. I will never forget the moment I took the stand. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the scratch of the court reporter's keyboard. Daniel was sitting at the defendant's table in a suit I had bought him for his 30th birthday, and when I walked past him to the witness stand, he looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Fear. "Mrs. Chen, can you tell the court what you heard your son say at Thanksgiving dinner last year?" I took a deep breath. I looked at Daniel, at my child, at the boy I had nursed and raised and sacrificed everything for. And then I looked away and told the truth. My son said I was a financial drain. He said I wouldn't be around much longer anyway. He talked about waiting for me to die so he could take my house and my savings. He talked about getting power of attorney over me so he could control everything. And how did hearing this make you feel? Like I had failed. Like I had spent my entire life loving someone who was never real. Like everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. Daniel's lawyer objected, saying my answer was not responsive to the question. The judge overruled him. "Mrs. Chen, can you tell the court about the money you gave your son over the years?" I pulled out the folder Patricia had helped me prepare. Inside was every record I could find: bank statements, canceled checks, wired transfer receipts, credit card statements. Every dollar I had given Daniel over the past decade documented and organized and totaled. $127,462, I said. "That's what I can prove. The actual amount is probably higher, but I didn't keep records of cash I gave him, or groceries I bought, or bills I paid." The courtroom was completely silent. "And why did you give your son this money?" "Because I loved him. Because I wanted to help him. Because he told me he needed it, and I believed him." I looked at Daniel then, forcing myself to meet his eyes. Because I was his mother, and mothers are supposed to help their children. I didn't know I was being used. I didn't know every request was a lie. I trusted my son, and he took advantage of that trust in the worst possible way. Daniel looked away first, and in that moment, I knew I had won. Not the case. That would be decided by the jury. But something more important, I had won back my dignity. I had won back my truth. I had won back myself. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, they found Daniel guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was a month later. Daniel's lawyer argued for leniency, citing his client's lack of prior criminal record and his willingness to seek treatment for what was clearly a psychological disorder. The prosecutor argued for the maximum sentence, citing the calculated nature of the crimes and the devastating impact on the victims. And then the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement. I had not planned to speak. Patricia had advised against it, saying that anything I said could be used in Daniel's appeal. But when the judge looked at me with those kind, tired eyes and asked if I had anything to say, I found myself standing up, walking to the podium, and speaking from a place I didn't know I had. Your Honor, I am 72 years old. I have worked my entire life. I was a nurse for 43 years, and I spent those years helping people, healing people, caring for people in their worst moments. I saved money. I invested money. I planned for a retirement where I could travel and volunteer and spend time with my grandchildren. Instead, I'm standing here today having lost over $127,000 to my own son, having lost my faith in my own judgment, having lost my belief that if you love someone enough and sacrifice enough and give enough, they will love you back. But I want to say something else today. I want to say that I am not a victim. I made choices. I chose to give that money. I chose to believe the lies. I chose to ignore the warning signs because facing them would have been too painful. And now I am choosing something different. I am choosing to testify against my own child because the truth matters more than my comfort. I am choosing to stand here and say that what Daniel did was wrong, not because I want to punish him, but because if I stayed silent, I would be complicit in his crimes. My son is not the man I raised him to be. Or maybe he is, and I was just too blind to see it. Either way, that is something I will have to live with for whatever time I have left. But I will live with it standing up. I will live with it with my eyes open, and I will never, ever let anyone make me feel like a burden for existing, or an inconvenience for being old, or a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be loved. That is all I have to say, Your Honor. Thank you for listening. The judge sentenced Daniel to 7 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole after 5. When the bailiff led him away, Daniel turned and looked at me one last time. His face was pale and drawn, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw the little boy he used to be. The boy who crawled into my bed during thunderstorms. The boy who brought me dandelions from the backyard because he thought they were flowers. The boy who told me he loved me every single night before he went to sleep. That boy was gone. Maybe he had never really existed, but I mourned him anyway, standing there in that courtroom watching my son walk away in chains. The months after the trial were strange and quiet. Rebecca finalized her divorce and moved to Seattle to start over. She called me every Sunday, and we talked about nothing and everything. 2 women bound together by the wreckage of a man we had both loved. Thomas came down from Boston and helped me organize my finances, my house, my life. We planted a garden in the backyard, tomatoes and peppers and herbs, and I spent long summer evenings sitting on the porch Robert had built 20 years ago, watching the fireflies dance across the lawn and trying to remember who I was before I became Daniel's mother. It was harder than I expected. For 43 years, my identity had been wrapped up in my son. I was Daniel's mother. That was who I was, what I did, why I existed. Every decision I made, from what I cooked for dinner to where I went on vacation, was filtered through the question of how it would affect Daniel. Every dollar I saved was saved for Daniel. Every prayer I said was said for Daniel. Now Daniel was in prison, and I had to figure out who Margaret Chin was when she was not being someone's mother. The first thing I did was take a trip. Just me, alone, driving down to the coast with nothing but a suitcase and a vague idea of sitting on a beach and watching the waves. Robert and I had always planned to do more traveling after we retired, but then his diagnosis came, and then the treatments, and then the hospice, and then nothing. We never got to see the places we had dreamed about. We never got to have the adventures we had promised ourselves. So I went to the beach alone. I rented a small cottage with a view of the ocean, and I spent a week doing absolutely nothing. I read books I had been meaning to read for years. I took long walks on the sand, letting the cold water wash over my feet. I ate dinner at restaurants where no one knew my name or my story or my shame. And on the last night, sitting on the cottage porch with a glass of wine and the sound of the waves crashing in the darkness, I finally let myself cry for everything I had lost.
Not just Daniel, not just the money, but the version of myself that had believed love was enough. The version of myself that had thought sacrifice would be rewarded. The version of myself that had trusted, completely and without reservation, that my child would never deliberately hurt me. That woman was gone. She had died somewhere between Thanksgiving dinner and the courtroom, between hearing my son calculate my death and watching him led away in chains. And I mourned her the same way I had mourned Robert, with deep and terrible grief, with the knowledge that something precious had been lost and would never come back. But grief, I had learned, was not the end. It was a passage. It was the dark tunnel you had to walk through to reach the light on the other side. When I came home from the beach, I started making changes, real changes, not just to my finances or my locks, but to my life. I joined a support group for survivors of elder abuse. It was held in the basement of the Methodist Church on Wednesdays at 7, and the first time I walked in, I almost turned around and left. The room was full of people like me, people who had been betrayed by the very family members they had trusted most, and seeing my own pain reflected in their faces was almost more than I could bear. "I'm Margaret," I said when it was my turn to introduce myself. "My son stole over $127,000 from me. He's in prison now. I testified against him at his trial." No one gasped. No one looked at me with pity or judgment. They just nodded because they understood. They had all been where I was. They had all had to make impossible choices between love and survival. A woman named Eleanor, who must have been at least 80, reached over and squeezed my hand. "It gets easier," she said. "Not easy, never easy, but easier." "Does it ever stop hurting?" "No, honey, but you learn to carry the hurt differently. You learn that the hurt doesn't have to define you." I went back every Wednesday for the next 2 years. I listened to stories that were worse than mine, stories of children who had forged DNR orders to let their parents die, stories of grandchildren who had stolen Social Security checks and left their grandparents homeless, stories of sons and daughters who had drugged their parents and emptied their bank accounts while they slept. And slowly, week by week, story by story, I began to understand that what had happened to me was not my fault. I had not failed as a mother. I had not loved too much or given too much or trusted too much. I had simply been unlucky enough to raise a child who saw love as weakness and generosity as opportunity.
Daniel's choices were his own. His cruelty was his own. His crimes were his own. I had given him every opportunity to be a good person, and he had chosen to be something else. That was not my burden to carry. The second change I made was to my relationship with money. For my entire life, I had treated money as something to be given away, something to be shared with the people I loved, something that had no value unless it was being used to help someone else. Robert and I had lived modestly so that we could give generously, and I had never questioned whether that generosity was being deserved. Now I questioned everything. I sat down with my financial advisor, a kind young woman named Priya, who had been handling my accounts since Robert's death, and I asked her to show me exactly where I stood, what I had, what I owed, what I could expect to live on for the rest of my life. The numbers were better than I had feared, but worse than I had hoped. Even with what Daniel had stolen, I still had my house, my savings, Robert's life insurance, and my pension from the hospital. If I was careful, if I didn't give any more money away, I could live comfortably for another 20 years. But you have to be careful, she said gently. You can't afford another loss like this. You need to start saying no. Saying no. It sounded so simple. Just 2 letters, just 1 syllable. But for a woman who had spent her entire life saying yes, it felt like learning a new language. I practiced. I practiced in the mirror, watching my face as I formed the word. I practiced with Thomas, who pretended to ask me for ridiculous things so I could refuse. I practiced with the telemarketers who called wanting donations, with the neighbors who wanted favors, with the church committees who wanted volunteers. No, I'm sorry, I can't help with that. No, that doesn't work for me. No, I'm not able to contribute right now. Each no felt like a small victory. Each no felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I had given away without even noticing. The third change I made was the hardest. I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Williams, and she had an office in a converted house near the hospital where I used to work. She was about my age, with gray hair and kind eyes, and a directness that reminded me of Robert.
"Why are you here, Margaret?" she asked at our first session. "Because I need to understand how this happened, how I raised a son who could do what Daniel did, how I missed the signs for so long, how I let myself be used and manipulated and stolen from without ever fighting back. Do you blame yourself for what Daniel did? Part of me does. Part of me thinks that if I had been a better mother, if I had been stricter or less generous or more attentive, he would have turned out differently." Dr. Williams nodded slowly. "And what does the other part of you think?" "The other part of me thinks I did everything right and it didn't matter. That some people are just broken in ways that can't be fixed. That Daniel made his choices and I couldn't have stopped him no matter what I did." "Which part do you want to believe?" I sat with that question for a long moment. Outside the window, I could see a cardinal sitting on a branch, its red feathers bright against the gray December sky. "I want to believe I'm not to blame," I finally said. "But I'm scared that if I believe that, I'm letting myself off the hook. I'm being too easy on myself." "Margaret," Dr. Williams said, leaning forward, "being kind to yourself is not the same as being easy on yourself. You can acknowledge that you made mistakes, that you missed signs, that you enabled certain behaviors, while also acknowledging that you are not responsible for another adult's criminal choices. Those 2 things can both be true." How do I do that? How do I hold both of those things at once? Practice, patience, time. She smiled gently, and a willingness to believe that you deserve compassion, even from yourself.
I saw Dr. Williams every Tuesday for 3 years. We talked about Daniel, about Robert, about my childhood and my marriage and my dreams. We talked about grief and guilt and the strange alchemy of forgiveness. We talked about what it meant to be a mother to a child who had become a stranger. And slowly, session by session, insight by insight, I began to heal. Not completely. There are wounds that never fully close. There are scars that ache when the weather changes. But I learned to live with the pain instead of being consumed by it. I learned to carry my grief like a heavy bag that I could set down sometimes instead of a weight that was crushing me. I learned to breathe again. The fourth change came unexpectedly, in the form of a phone call from Rebecca. It was a Tuesday evening in early spring, and I was sitting on my porch watching the tulips I had planted last fall finally pushing through the soil. My phone rang, and when I saw Rebecca's name on the screen, I smiled. "Hi, honey. How's Seattle?" "It's good, Margaret. Really good. I actually have some news." There was something in her voice, a lightness I hadn't heard in years. "I'm getting married again." "Rebecca, that's wonderful! Tell me everything." She told me about Marcus, a pediatrician she had met at a fundraiser for the nonprofit where she now worked. She told me about their first date, a disaster involving a spilled drink and a fire alarm and somehow ending up at a taco truck at 2 in the morning. She told me about the proposal on a hiking trail overlooking the Puget Sound, with the sun setting over the water and the city lights twinkling below. "Margaret," she said, and her voice grew serious, "I don't have any family, really. My parents are gone, my brother and I don't speak, but you've been more of a mother to me than anyone. And I was wondering, would you come to the wedding? Would you sit in the front row where the mother of the bride is supposed to sit?" I couldn't speak. I pressed my hand against my mouth and let the tears fall, overwhelmed by the unexpected gift of still being wanted, still being needed, still being loved. "Margaret, are you there?" "I'm here," I managed. Yes, of course I'll come. I would be honored." "There's one more thing," Rebecca said, "and I know this might be complicated, and you can absolutely say no if it's too much. But Daniel gets out of prison in 6 months, and I thought you should know that Marcus and I have decided to get married before then, so there's no chance of him showing up and ruining the day. Has he tried to contact you?" "Once, about a year ago, he sent a letter through his lawyer, apologizing for everything and asking if we could talk. I didn't respond." "Did you want to?" Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "Part of me did. Part of me wanted to hear him explain why. Part of me wanted to look him in the eye and ask how he could have done what he did to you, to me, to everyone who ever trusted him. But then I realized that there was no explanation that would make it okay. There was no apology that would undo the damage. And I decided that my peace was more important than his excuses." "That's very mature of you, Rebecca." "I learned it from you," she said softly. "You taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away." I flew to Seattle for Rebecca's wedding in June. It was a small ceremony, just 30 people in a garden overlooking the water, with fairy lights strung through the trees and wildflowers in mason jars on every table. Rebecca wore a simple white dress and a crown of daisies in her hair, and she had never looked more beautiful. Marcus was everything Daniel was not: kind, genuine, completely transparent in his adoration of Rebecca. I watched him watch her walk down the aisle, And I saw in his face what I used to see in Robert's face when he looked at me, that mixture of wonder and gratitude and pure, uncomplicated love. When they asked me to say a few words at the reception, I stood up on shaky legs and looked out at the small gathering of people who had come to celebrate this new beginning. I am not Rebecca's mother, I said. Her mother passed away many years ago, and I would never try to take her place. But I am proud to be standing here today in the spot where a mother would stand, because Rebecca is one of the finest people I have ever known. Many of you know that Rebecca was married to my son. Many of you know how that marriage ended. What you might not know is that Rebecca was the one who saved me. She was the one who showed me the truth when I was too blind to see it. She was the one who held my hand through the hardest year of my life, even though she was going through her own hell at the same time. That is who Rebecca is. That is the woman Marcus is marrying today. Someone who sees injustice and fights against it. Someone who sees suffering and tries to ease it. Someone who chooses courage over comfort, truth over convenience, love over fear. To Rebecca and Marcus, may your life together be filled with the kind of love that makes you brave. The applause washed over me like warm water, and I sat down feeling lighter than I had in years. Across the table, Rebecca caught my eye and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." I nodded, unable to speak. The flight home the next day was long and gave me plenty of time to think about Rebecca and her new beginning, about Daniel and his approaching release, about what I would do when my son was finally free. I had not seen him since the trial. I had not written to him in prison, had not accepted his phone calls, had not responded to the letters his lawyer had forwarded. Part of me felt guilty about that, felt like I was abandoning him when he needed me most. But a larger part of me knew that I could not survive another cycle of manipulation and betrayal, that the only way to protect myself was to stay away. Still, he was my son, and in 6 months, he would be out. And I had no idea what would happen then. The answer came sooner than I expected. I was sitting in my kitchen one morning in early September, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and felt my heart stop. It was Daniel. He was thinner than I remembered, his hair grayer, his face lined in ways that made him look older than his 44 years. He was wearing clothes I didn't recognize, cheap and ill-fitting, and he was standing by his car looking at my house like he wasn't sure he had the right address. I stood frozen at the window, unable to move, unable to think. Every plan I had made, every boundary I had established, every word I had rehearsed with Dr. Williams flew out of my head. All I could see was my son, standing in my driveway looking lost and broken and alone. My phone rang. It was the security company calling to alert me that someone had pulled into my driveway. "Mrs. Chen, do you want us to notify the police?" I watched Daniel take a hesitant step toward my front door. "No," I heard myself say. "No, it's okay. I know him." I hung up and walked to the front door on legs that felt like someone else's. I opened the door and stepped on the porch, and for a long moment, Daniel and I just looked at each other. "Mom," he said finally. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't used it in a while. "I know I'm not supposed to be here. I know you have every right to call the police, but I needed to see you. I needed to tell you." "Tell me what, Daniel?" He flinched at the coldness in my voice. "That I'm sorry. That I know sorry isn't enough, that I understand if you never want to see me again." Swallowed hard, "But you're my mother, and I couldn't go on with my life without at least trying to apologize." "Apologize? You want to apologize?" I know it sounds hollow. "I know you have no reason to believe anything I say, but prison changed me, Mom. It gave me time to think about what I did, who I was, who I want to be. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for money or help or another chance. I'm just asking you to listen. I looked at my son, at this stranger wearing my child's face, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Curiosity. Not hope, not love, not even anger. Just a genuine desire to understand.
You have 10 minutes, I said. Then you leave. And if you ever show up here unannounced again, I will call the police. Daniel nodded quickly. Okay, that's fair. We sat on the porch, me in the rocking chair Robert had made for our anniversary, Daniel on the steps, like a penitent child. The morning sun slanted through the trees, casting long shadows across the lawn. I've been in therapy, Daniel said. In prison. There was a program for inmates with financial crimes. We met 3 times a week and talked about why we did what we did, what was missing in us that made us think it was okay to steal and lie and hurt people, and what was missing in you, Daniel. He was quiet for a long moment. Empathy, I think. The ability to see other people as real. To me, everyone was just a resource, a means to an end. I saw what I wanted and I figured out how to get it, and I never once stopped to think about who I was hurting in the process. Including your own mother? Especially my own mother. His voice cracked. Because you were the easiest target. You loved me so much that you couldn't see what I was doing, and I used that love against you. I weaponized it. Every time I needed money, I knew exactly what to say to make you give it to me. Every time you started to question me, I knew exactly how to make you feel guilty for doubting your own son. Why? The question came out like a wound. Why would you do that to someone who loved you? What did I ever do to deserve that? Daniel looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Genuine anguish. Nothing, Mom. You did nothing wrong. You were a good mother. You gave me everything. And I was just broken. Something in me was broken, and instead of trying to fix it, I let it consume me. And now? Is it fixed now? I don't know, honestly. I'm trying. I'm in therapy twice a week. I'm going to meetings for people with compulsive lying and manipulation issues. I'm living in a halfway house where they monitor my finances and my behavior. I'm doing everything I can to become someone different. And you expect me to believe that? After everything you've done? No, I don't expect you to believe anything. But I needed you to hear it anyway. He stood up, brushing off his pants, and I noticed how thin his wrists were, how hollow his cheeks looked. I'm gonna go now. I won't come back unless you invite me. But I want you to know that I love you, Mom. I know that sounds meaningless after what I did, but it's true. In my own broken, twisted way, I always loved you. Loving someone and hurting them are supposed to be opposites, Daniel. I know. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to understand how I did both at the same time. He walked to his car and I watched him go, my heart pounding, my hands gripping the arms of my rocking chair. Just before he opened the door, he turned back. The folder on my computer, the one labeled Mom's Estate, I want you to know that I deleted it before I went to prison. I couldn't stand to look at it anymore. I couldn't stand to see the evidence of what I had become. That doesn't make it okay. I know, but I thought you should know. He got in his car and drove away, and I sat on my porch for a long time after he was gone, thinking about love and forgiveness and the complicated mess of being human. I did not call Daniel that day, or the next day, or the day after that, but I did call Dr. Williams. He came to see me, I told her. Daniel, he showed up at my house.
Are you okay? Do you need to come in for an emergency session? No, I'm I'm okay. Better than I expected, actually. I thought seeing him would destroy me, but instead I just felt sad. Sad for him. Sad for the person he could have been if something hadn't gone wrong somewhere along the way. That's a very compassionate response, Margaret. Is it wrong to feel compassion for someone who hurt me so badly? There's no wrong way to feel. The question is what you do with those feelings. What do you want to do? I considered the question for a long time. I want to heal. I want to move forward. I want to build a life that isn't defined by what Daniel did to me. And does that life include Daniel? I don't know. Maybe someday, but not yet. I'm not ready yet. Then that's your answer. You don't have to decide anything today. You don't have to forgive him or shut him out forever. You can just wait and see how you feel as time goes on. That's allowed? Margaret, everything is allowed. This is your life. You get to live it however you want. The months that followed were quiet and full. I threw myself into my volunteer work at the hospital, spending time with patients who had no one else to visit them. I expanded my garden, adding raised beds for vegetables and a small greenhouse for starting seedlings in the winter. I joined a book club and a walking group and a cooking class where I learned to make foods I had never heard of before. And every few months, I got a letter from Daniel. They were short, careful letters, updates on his therapy, his job search, his struggles with rebuilding his life. He never asked for money. He never asked to see me. He just wrote to let me know he was still there, still trying, still hoping that someday I might be ready to reconnect. I read every letter. I saved them in a shoebox in my closet, but I never wrote back. 2 years passed, then 3, then 5. I turned 77, then 78, then 79. My hair went completely gray. My joints got stiffer. My walks got shorter. But I was happy in a way I hadn't been since Robert died. Happy in my own company. Happy in my independence. Happy in the knowledge that I had survived the worst thing that had ever happened to me and come out the other side. And then, on my 80th birthday, something changed. Rebecca called to wish me happy birthday, as she did every year. We talked about her children, twins she had named Robert and Margaret after the people who had shaped her life. We talked about her work, her garden, her plans for the summer. And then, just before we hung up, she said something that stayed with me for days. Margaret, I forgave Daniel last year. I nearly dropped the phone. You did? I did. I didn't tell him. I didn't reach out to him or anything. But I realized that holding on to that anger was hurting me more than it was hurting him. So I just let it go. And I feel lighter now, freer. How did you do it? How did you forgive someone who did what he did? I realized that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about me. It's about deciding that I'm not going to let what happened define the rest of my life. It's about choosing peace over resentment. That sounds very wise. I don't know about wise. I just know I couldn't carry it anymore. The weight of all that anger, it was exhausting. And I thought, life is too short. My children are growing up. I have a husband who loves me. I have work that matters. Why am I spending so much energy hating someone who isn't even in my life anymore? After we hung up, I sat with Rebecca's words for a long time. I thought about Daniel's letters. Still coming every few months, still careful and hopeful and asking for nothing. I thought about the boy he used to be and the man he had become. I thought about all the years we had lost and all the years we might still have. And I made a decision. I wrote Daniel a letter, just a few lines, nothing dramatic or emotional. Daniel, I got your latest letter. Thank you for continuing to write. I'm not ready to see you yet, but I want you to know that I'm working toward forgiveness, not for your sake, for mine. I don't know if we'll ever have a relationship again, but I wanted you to know that I haven't given up hope entirely. Mom. I mailed it before I could change my mind. His response came a week later, also short, also careful. Mom. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. I'll keep writing. I'll keep waiting, however long it takes. Love, Daniel. I read his letter 3 times. Then I put it in the shoebox with all the others, and I went outside to work in my garden. The tulips were blooming again. It was spring, and the world was coming back to life. And I was 80 years old, and still here, still standing, still healing. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if Daniel and I would ever rebuild what we had lost. I didn't know if forgiveness was possible or even desirable after everything that had happened. But I knew this. I was not a burden. I was not a financial drain. I was not something to be managed or controlled or exploited. I was Margaret Chin. I was a mother and a widow and a survivor. I had been betrayed by the person I loved most in the world, and I had found my way back to myself. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. The day I finally agreed to see Daniel again was the day I was sitting on my porch, watching the sunset, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink and gold. I was 82 years old, and I had just finished a phone call with Rebecca, who had told me that her twins were starting kindergarten in the fall, and she wanted me to come visit for their first day. I thought about time, how it passes whether we want it to or not, how the years slip away like water through our fingers, impossible to hold on to no matter how hard we try. Daniel was 53 now. He had been out of prison for 8 years. He had rebuilt his life slowly, painstakingly, the way someone rebuilds a house that is burned down. He had a job as an accountant at a small nonprofit, using his skills to help rather than hurt. He had a small apartment in a town 2 hours away. He had a therapist he still saw weekly, a sponsor from his support group, a routine that kept him honest. And he had never stopped writing. Every few months, a letter would arrive, updates on his life, his progress, his continued therapy. He never asked for money, never asked to visit, never pushed for more than I was willing to give. He just wrote to let me know he was still there, still trying, still hoping that someday I might be ready to reconnect.
I had started writing back a few years ago. Short notes at first, just acknowledgments that I had received his letters. Then longer ones, sharing small details about my life, my garden, my volunteer work. We had rebuilt a connection slowly, carefully. 2 people learning to trust each other again from a distance of hundreds of miles. That evening, watching the sunset from my porch, I made a decision. I called Daniel's number, and when he answered, his voice cautious and surprised,
I said the words I had been afraid to say for a decade. I think I'm ready, I told him. I think I'm ready to see you. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a long moment. Then I heard him take a shaky breath. Are you sure, Mom? I don't want to push you. I can wait as long as you need. I've waited long enough, Daniel. We both have. He came the following weekend. I watched from my window as he pulled into the driveway in a modest, used car, as he sat in the driver's seat for several minutes gathering his courage, as he finally stepped out and walked toward my door. He was older now, gray at the temples, lines around his eyes, a softness to his face that hadn't been there before. He looked like his father had looked in his 50s, and the resemblance made my heart ache. I opened the door before he could knock. We stood there looking at each other, mother and son, two people who had hurt each other in ways that could never be fully undone. I saw the fear in his eyes, the hope he was trying to contain, the desperate need for this to go well. And I saw something else, something that had been missing all those years ago when he sat in his in-laws' dining room talking about me like I was an asset to be liquidated. I saw remorse. Real, genuine, bone-deep remorse. Hi, Mom, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Hi, Daniel. Can I hug you? I considered the question, considered what it would mean to let him touch me again, to allow that intimacy after everything that had happened. I thought about all the therapy sessions, all the support group meetings, all the long nights I had spent learning to distinguish between healthy love and enabling. And I thought about what Dr. Williams had told me years ago. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to move forward despite what happened. Yes, I said. You can hug me. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around me, and I felt him shaking, his whole body trembling with the force of emotions he was trying to contain. I hugged him back, and we stood there in my doorway for a long moment. Two broken people trying to find their way back to each other. I'm so sorry, Mom, he whispered against my hair. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are. I know you are. We went inside and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had sat so many years ago, tallying up everything he had stolen from me. I made coffee and we talked. Really talked for the first time in over a decade. He told me about prison, about the therapy that had finally forced him to confront who he really was. He told me about the shame that had nearly destroyed him when he fully understood what he had done. He told me about the long road of recovery, the setbacks, the moments when he wanted to give up. And I told him about my journey, about the support group and Dr. Williams and the slow process of rebuilding my sense of self, about the anger that had eventually softened into something more manageable, about the decision to write him back, to start the long process of reconnection. I don't know if we can ever be what we were, I told him honestly. I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to see who you've become. That's all I can ask for, Mom. That's more than I deserve. We spent the afternoon together. We walked in my garden and he helped me stake the tomato plants that were getting too tall. We cooked dinner together, a simple meal of pasta and salad, and we ate at my kitchen table while the sun set outside the window. Before he left, he stood in my doorway and looked at me with those eyes I had loved since the moment he was born. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me another chance, for not giving up on me even when you had every right to. You're my son, Daniel. No matter what you did, no matter how much you hurt me, you're still my son. And mothers don't give up on their children, even when they should. Even then." He drove away into the darkness, and I stood on my porch watching his tail lights disappear down the road. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if this fragile reconciliation would last or if it would crumble under the weight of too much history. But I knew that I had made the right choice. Not for Daniel, but for me. I had chosen hope over bitterness, connection over isolation, love over fear. And that, I realized, was the lesson of everything I had been through. Not that blood is thicker than water or that mothers should sacrifice everything for their children, but that we get to choose. Every day, in every moment, we get to choose who we want to be and how we want to live. I had spent 43 years choosing to give and give and give until there was nothing left. I had spent a decade choosing to protect myself, to heal, to rebuild. And now I was choosing something new. A cautious, clear-eyed love that asked for nothing and expected nothing, but was offered freely anyway. That was my victory. Not the trial, not the conviction, not the money I had recovered or the boundaries I had set. My victory was learning that I could survive the worst betrayal imaginable and still find my way back to love. Not naive love, not blind love, not the desperate, all-consuming love that had made me vulnerable in the first place, but a wiser love, tempered by experience, strengthened by suffering, offered with open eyes and a protected heart. The years that followed were not perfect. Daniel and I had setbacks, moments when old patterns threatened to resurface, conversations that ended in tears or silence. There were times when I had to step back to reinforce boundaries, to remind both of us that reconciliation did not mean returning to the way things were. But there were good moments, too. Dinners at my kitchen table where we laughed about old memories, afternoons in my garden where he helped me plant and weed and harvest, phone calls where we talked about nothing important, just two people staying connected across the distance. He never asked me for money again. Not once in all the years after his release. He lived modestly within his means, and when he struggled, he found other ways to cope, healthy ways that didn't involve manipulating the people who loved him. I watched him build a new life, piece by piece. He volunteered at a financial literacy program for young people, teaching them the skills he wished someone had taught him. He spoke at support groups for people recovering from compulsive lying and manipulation. He wrote letters to his victims, including me, taking full responsibility for what he had done. He became someone I could be proud of, not the person I had dreamed he would be when I held him as a baby, but a person who had faced his demons and chosen to fight them. A person who had done terrible things and decided to spend the rest of his life trying to make amends. On my 85th birthday, Daniel drove down to celebrate with me. Rebecca and her family flew in from Seattle, and for the first time in 20 years, we were all together. Me, my son, my daughter-in-law, who was no longer my daughter-in-law, but still family, her children, who called me Grandma Margaret, even though we shared no blood. We gathered in my backyard, around the garden I had been tending for over a decade, and we ate cake and told stories and laughed until our sides hurt. The twins, now 13, asked me questions about what the world was like when I was young. Rebecca's husband Marcus grilled burgers and made terrible dad jokes, and Daniel sat beside me, quiet and present, his hand occasionally reaching out to squeeze mine. After everyone else had gone to bed, Daniel and I sat on the porch, watching the fireflies dance across the lawn, just like they had all those years ago when I first started rebuilding my life. "Thank you, Mom," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for being willing to try again, for showing me that people can change, that mistakes don't have to be forever." I looked at my son, at this man who had caused me more pain than anyone in my life, but who had also given me more joy. I thought about all the years we had lost, all the money he had stolen, all the trust he had broken. I thought about the trial and the prison and the long, slow road back to each other. "Daniel, do you know what I've learned in 85 years?" "What, Mom?" "That life is too short for grudges. That holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That forgiveness isn't about excusing what someone did. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of carrying it." "Do you forgive me? Really forgive me?" I considered the question carefully, the way I had learned to consider everything in the years since that Thanksgiving dinner when my world fell apart. "I forgive you," I said finally. "Not because you deserve it, though I think you've earned it. Not because what you did wasn't terrible, because it was, but because I refuse to spend whatever time I have left being defined by the worst thing that ever happened to me." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say. "You don't have to say anything. Just keep being the man you've become. Keep trying. Keep growing. That's all I've ever wanted for you, Daniel. Not money or success or power. Just for you to be a good person." "I'm trying, Mom. Every day, I'm trying." "I know you are. And that's enough. That's more than enough." We sat there for a long time, mother and son, watching the stars come out one by one. The night was warm and still, the air thick with the scent of honeyconnel and cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked and fell silent. I thought about Robert, gone now for almost 15 years. I wondered what he would think if he could see us now, his wife and his son, finally at peace with each other and themselves. I'd like to think he would be proud. Proud of me for standing up for myself. Proud of Daniel for doing the hard work of change. Proud of both of us for finding our way through the darkness.
I miss your father, I said. I know, Mom. I miss him too. He would be glad we found our way back to each other. Do you think so? I know so. Your father believed in second chances. He believed that people could change, that love could overcome anything. He would have wanted this for us. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I wish I had been a better son while he was alive. I wish he could have seen who I've become. Maybe he can. Maybe he's watching right now, from wherever he is. Do you believe that? I smiled into the darkness. I believe that love doesn't end when someone dies. I believe that the people we've lost stay with us, in our hearts and our memories and the ways they shaped who we are. Your father is with me every day, Daniel. Every time I work in the garden he helped me plant. Every time I sit in the chair he built for me. Every time I look at you and see his eyes. I see him in you too, Mom. The strength, the stubbornness, the way you never give up on the people you love, even when they give you every reason to. That's not strength, Daniel. That's just love. Real love. The kind that sees people clearly, flaws and all, and chooses them anyway. I want to love like that someday. You can. You already do. I see it in the way you've changed, the way you've fought to become someone better. That's love, Daniel. Love for yourself, love for the person you want to be. And from that kind of love, all other love flows. We sat in silence as the night deepened around us, and I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. The journey had been long and painful, full of betrayals and broken trust, and moments when I thought I would never recover. But I had come through it. We had come through it. And here we were on the other side, scarred but whole, wounded but healing. The next morning, I woke early and went to my garden. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and the dew was still fresh on the leaves. I walked among my plants, checking for pests, pulling the occasional weed, marveling at the abundance of life growing from the soil I had nurtured for so many years. This garden, I thought, was a lot like my life. It had known seasons of growth and seasons of dormancy. It had weathered storms and droughts and unexpected frosts. There had been years when nothing seemed to grow, when I thought I would never harvest anything again. But I had kept tending it anyway. I had kept planting seeds, kept pulling weeds, kept believing that something beautiful would eventually bloom. And it had. Despite everything, it had. Daniel found me in the garden an hour later, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. I made breakfast, pancakes, your recipe. You remembered my recipe? Of course I did, Mom. I remember everything. The good and the bad. I don't want to forget any of it. Most people want to forget the bad parts. I can't afford to forget. If I forget what I did, I might do it again. The memories keep me honest. I took the coffee cup from his hand and looked at my son, really looked at him, at the gray in his hair and the lines around his eyes, at the humility in his posture and the clarity in his gaze, at the man he had become through suffering and hard work and the daily choice to be better. I'm proud of you, Daniel. His eyes widened. You are? I am. Not for what you accomplished, or what you own, or how successful you've become, but for who you are, for the courage it takes to face your demons, for the strength it takes to change, for the humility it takes to keep trying, day after day, even when it would be easier to give up. Mom, Let me finish. I set down my coffee cup and took both his hands in mine.
I spent a lot of years thinking I had failed as a mother, thinking that if I had done something different, if I had been stricter or more attentive or less generous, you would have turned out differently. But I don't think that anymore. What changed? I realized that you're not my creation. You're your own person. You made your own choices, good and bad. And yes, some of those choices hurt me terribly. But the choices you're making now, the person you're becoming now, those are yours too. You did that, not me. You. Daniel squeezed my hands, tears streaming down his face. I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. Without knowing that you were out there hoping I would change. That hope kept me going through the darkest times. Then we saved each other. That's what family does. Not perfect family, not the family we see in movies or dream about in fairy tales, but real family, broken family, family that falls apart and puts itself back together, over and over, as many times as it takes. We stood there in my garden, holding each other, the sun warm on our backs, and the smell of coffee and growing things all around us. And I felt for the first time in many years, completely at peace. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. The scars were still there, would always be there. The trust had been rebuilt, but it would never be as absolute as it once was. The money was gone, and most of it would never be recovered. I had survived the worst betrayal a mother can experience. I had faced my pain, named it, worked through it. I had set boundaries and enforced them. I had protected myself without closing myself off completely. I had found my way to forgiveness without sacrificing my self-respect. And in the end, I had learned the most important lesson of all, that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond to it. That even the deepest wounds can heal if we give them enough time and care. That love, real love, is not about never being hurt, but about choosing to stay open even after you've been hurt. I am Margaret Chen. I am 85 years old. I am a widow, a mother, a survivor. I have been lied to, stolen from, manipulated, and betrayed by the person I loved most in the world. And I am still here, still standing, still growing, still loving. That is my story. That is my victory. That is my gift to anyone who reads these words and recognizes themselves in them. You are not alone. You are not to blame. You are not a burden. You are worthy of love, of respect, of dignity. And no one, not even the people closest to you, has the right to take that away from you. Stand up, fight back, protect yourself, and never, ever forget that your worth is not determined by how much you give or how much you sacrifice or how much you allow others to take from you. Your worth is inherent. Your worth is infinite. Your worth is yours. Now, go tend your garden. Something beautiful is waiting to bloom. Hope you liked the story. I think so. If yes, comment yes and like the video. And don't forget to subscribe Voices of Auntie Masha YouTube channel for such unique and amazing stories. Thanks for being with me.